Anne-Marie's kind of stole my thunder. So let me just explain a little bit how this is going to work. This session, we always planned to have Lewis come to speak, and then I was at, we act for the Scottish Police Federation, and I was at a Scottish Police Federation conference, and Marshall was speaking on concussion in relation to police officers and how they can be concussed on duty, and he was talking about some of his research that he does in relation to rugby, and then Tim was there talking about Hedkayse, so I thought, these guys would be brilliant at the Head Injury Information Day. So I snaffled Tim after the dinner, after he had a few beers, and they kindly agreed to come along today to share their knowledge. So what's going to happen is Marshall will explain a little bit about how a concussion impacts people in rugby and talk about some of the work he's doing. Then we'll do a Q&A with Lewis, and Lewis will talk firsthand about how concussion has had an adverse impact on his life as and caused him to retire from professional rugby. And then, with a positive note at the end, Tim's going to talk about how science is going to make a difference, hopefully, to the game going forward, to help keep it safe. There's no magic bullet. It's a contact sport, but hopefully, with some of the science that Hedkayse and all other companies are working with, we can keep rugby safe. So I'm really delighted to have all three today. It's a stellar panel. I'm really, really delighted. So without further ado, enough from me. I'll hand over to Marshall to kick us off.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me start very briefly by saying it's a rare day that a Glaswegian gets invited to speak in Edinburgh. So I'm already a winner here. So thank you very much indeed for the invitation from Digby Brown. We haven't got particularly long, so if you'll forgive me, I decided the way to go here is instead of spending 6 hours trying to take you through all the complex science, let's talk about some of the stuff that folks don't really know, or the common misconceptions. Concussion is an incredibly complex subject at one level. It's an incredibly simple issue at another level, which may seem like a very strange thing to say. Most of that is because there is lack of knowledge. There is no education out there, or very little of it. There's very little specifically in medicine, and there are a lot of misconceptions. So if I take or give you nothing else today, let's try and knock some of those misconceptions out of the park so everybody knows where we are. We're all talking from the same hymn sheet. So, concussion, quick outline. Nomenclature, please. The one thing that really annoys me is watching a game of rugby with fantastic athletes on there, and we've got some stupid commentator going, oh, he's getting a head injury assessment because he's got a head knock. What's a head knock? That's the thing I did going into the bathroom this morning because I wasn't quite walking straight and I dinked myself off the edge. That wasn't a concussion. That was a minor dink to my head. Concussion. We all bandy the word around the place, but most people don't actually know what a concussion really is. Concussion's used as an expression to make people look good. They go, oh yeah, had a concussion, got a concussion, might get a concussion. Yeah, exactly. What is a concussion? A concussion is this nebulous thing, but it's not. It is a minor traumatic brain injury, MTBI, people. And the reason us doctors like insisting on that is it is a quantifiable injury. It is a minor traumatic brain injury, and that means there are axons damaged. You cannot resurrect a brain cell. It's dead. It's broken. It releases protein. That protein irritates brain cells alongside. Their functionality goes down. So it is a progressive issue, but normally temporary, and it will tend to settle in the majority of individuals, but not always. There's the definition for you: a temporary disruption of brain function following a blow to the head or transmitted bodily force. You don't have to hit your head to get a concussion. If I had somebody as big and powerful as Tim run into me from the back, I'm going to go into an abrupt whiplash type mechanism. It's the abrupt head movement and brain movement within that head that causes the damage. The old understanding that most of you probably heard is, oh, your brain's bounced around inside your skull. And there used to be a great graphic that I was shown at medical school back in the 70s and 80s, where you saw this brain that was a lump of jelly bouncing off the inside of the frontal area, bouncing off the inside of the occipital area. And then there was this bruise on the brain and bruise on the other side. And that was my knowledge for many, many years. It's absolute cobblers. That's not what a concussion does. That's a contre coup injury, which I don't have time to go into. What the actual injury is transmission of force through the brain material. The brain is rather like a just set jelly. That's the best way I can give you. If you had a brain in your hand, you've seen all these people on the TV, they've got a brain in their hand. That's a brain that's been fixed in formaldehyde. It's firm. In a live brain, it's gelatinous. You can slap it and it sloshes around. And inside that brain, it's not all the same texture. Some areas are firmer, some areas are softer. If you put a force load through that, the more liquid pieces will move further than the more solid pieces, and you get a shear stress at various areas within the brain. And a shear stress ruptures axons. Axons are long, skinny things like a ramen noodle, for want of a better word. Incidentally, ladies, you have angel hair, Raymond. Us men have big, fat, lumping, fat noodles. And there's a very interesting paper I'd refer you all to in 2018 by Dole, D-O-L-L-E acute, who actually did fantastic electron microscopy and has shown there is a differential size between male brain cells and female brain cells. Ladies, you have just as many as we do. Yours are just slimmer and more elegant. Now, features of a concussion, they are multiple. And this is why I say people think they know about concussion. The only two definitive indicators of a concussion are A, loss of consciousness, B, amnesia. There are a whole raft of others: headache, dizziness, nausea, poor memory, poor higher cognitive function, difficulties with discerning what you have in your hand, difficulties in numeracy, short-term memory. Those are reportable symptoms. Brain fog we've all heard of, but I'll leave Lewis to describe brain fog for you because a lived experience is important. But brain fog, you just know something's wrong, it's just not all working the way it should do. But don't disregard a sleep upset. And this is particularly important for those of you who are parents who have kids, potentially taking a blow to the head. They may sleep normally for 8 hours a night. Suddenly they're sleeping 4 hours, they're up, they're playing on their Xbox, doing whatever, or they might suddenly be sleeping 14 hours, or they may have difficulty going off. Sleep disruption is actually quite a significant symptom, and everybody forgets to ask about it. Now, this is the important point. Forgive me for using the word concussion, it's just a little easier to give the flow rather than call it an MTBI for you. The thing with concussions is, most of them are comparatively short-lived and they are self-limiting. But I just said to you a few minutes ago, well, hang on a sec, you kill off brain cells. So how does that brain cell get better? Because you also said you can't resurrect a brain cell. Our brains are made up of billions of neurons. And in most brain areas, we have a huge redundancy. We've got a whole load of brain cells there that are sort of just going along in the background, not doing anything. You kill off some, and your brain's very, very good at rerouting the information through allied brain cells. And so what happens is, by your brain auto-retraining itself, the symptoms that you were experiencing dissipate because you've returned to your correct cognitive chain link on the way through. Part of the reason we think that some people do much better than others is, depending on what area of your brain you have your axonal damage, some brain areas have a lot less redundancy, so you haven't got the alternative pathways, and you may not actually get back the level of function that you had before. But as a broad generality, 80 to 90% of concussional injuries will settle over the first couple of weeks, month at the outside. But we're left with 10 to 15% which have more persistent symptoms. There is no set time, amazingly enough, in medicine after which you are suddenly considered to be somebody with PCS, which I'll come back to, or you've got ongoing symptoms, or you've got better. In point of fact, about a month is the area that we would say, well, okay, if there's still symptoms suggestive of concussion, if you're going a month or beyond, we're starting to think you've got a persistent concussional syndrome. Please don't use that word. Persistent concussional symptoms. A syndrome is a known raft of symptoms that is repeatable in different individuals, and concussional type symptoms can vary hugely. So what we would prefer, nomenclature-wise, is persistent concussional symptoms, please, folks, because that's the new brave world. Now, diagnosis. That's the tricky bit. Because your concussional symptoms are essentially subjective, we can't stick you into a machine and suddenly say, oh, you've got a concussion. Unless you're very, very, very lucky and we've got a functional MRI scan or we do brain spectroscopy on you, which can and is starting to show us changes consistent with concussional injuries. But these are in their infancy. There's the Institute of Excellence here in Edinburgh. There's the Institute of Excellence across in Glasgow that we're using. We've got 2 Tesla 7 machines, which is like 200 megapixels on your phone compared to 2. We can start seeing changes. We're starting to see the ability to diagnose, but really only in an experimental and research setting at the moment. We also have biomarkers, which are basically proteins that are released by damaged brain cells, go into your blood supply, and you can get those either in saliva or you can get them in blood. There's a raft of them. None of them are really particularly reliable yet, although there's one called S100B, which is showing good promise. But we don't know what the natural range of those is yet. We haven't got it quantified. So what I'm saying is we're doing the work, we're getting there, but we haven't got it nailed down yet. But we're going to get there in the next decade or two. But because we get release of proteins as well as instant axonal damage, those proteins within the brain actually irritate and damage the cells alongside them. So the best analogy I can give you is you've got one central brain cell, it's the damaged one, you've got 6, 7, 8 immediately around it, chemicals go out and it damages those. So instead of having this one, suddenly the effect is bigger. But that takes time, and that's why concussion tends to be progressive. We don't necessarily see a full-blown concussional picture immediately. I see virtually no point in doing a head injury assessment at pitch side. All that that's doing is saying, okay, this person still has a baseline of function at the moment. They haven't got enough subjective symptoms to say they've got a concussion. Let's stick them back into the white-hot crucible of competition where, because their brain function is progressively getting worse as the game goes on, they're more at risk of getting a secondary head injury with all that that implies with it. So be aware that you may not have too much of a problem straight away. 6 hours, 12 hours, 18, 24, 36 hours later, you may have crashing headaches, you can't remember who you are, you can't remember how to drive, and you really want to just go away into a dark room with a glass of water and nobody comes in. That is the evolution of concussions in the immediate post-injury phase. Most of you may be aware of the new grassroots guidance from government, UK-wide, came out last week. And it is basically suggesting a mandatory sit-out period for 21 days for individuals who have a concussion. And that is on the basis of subjective assessment, so there's no fancy stuff at grassroots level. You're lucky if there's a doctor on pitch side, lucky if you've got a physio at pitch side. But recognise something is wrong. And that's for all of us. That's for parents, that's for physios, that's for those of us who are invested in head injuries. Then, mandatory 21 days. Personally, I think that's quite a good mandatory sit-out time frame because there was an excellent widespread study in the States in 2016 which showed that 21 days is about the recovery to asymptomatic for male collegiate football players. There hasn't been a big study or a big enough one done in rugby yet in women. The interesting thing was the women's aggregate recovery time was 28 days. So 21 days for the boys is kind of okay, but every concussion's different. Treat it as you find it. But should we have a differential between males and females? Well, World Rugby on the 1st of February wrote to me, Iana Falvey, who's the Chief Medical Officer, wrote to me in response to a big paper I did on the medical legal implications of differentials between males and females. And World Rugby have accepted women are more susceptible to concussions, women tend to have more prolonged symptomatology, The first time that was mentioned verbally was at a press briefing at Murrayfield the week before last, where a representative from World Rugby came along. It is nowhere on their website. It is not in the press, because the press didn't really realise what the implication was. But they've now gone that way. So we are making progress. But hey, why do you have problems between grassroots and elite players? I am not an elite player, certainly not now. I never was an elite player. I played at a decent level. That man over there, Tim, he played at the ultimate level for the Lions. But Tim and I were having a curry last night, and we both agreed, no matter how elite and how athletic you are bodily, our brains are the same in terms of their resilience. So how can you have a legal statute for grassroots that differs from the elite when you're not providing any greater protection for the elite's brains? That's a question for the unions and government. So, persistent concussional symptoms that I was coming on to. Sorry, I'm going at a bit of a rate here. I'm nearly sort of at my time. Persistent concussional symptoms, beyond a month, you still have symptoms, whatever your raft may be. Be aware, women are twice as likely to have depression compared to men. That's not with a concussion. That's just in the background population. That's the WHO figures. We know that there's a 2.5 times greater likelihood of depression post-concussional head injury. Then you apply that to the twice risk of females, multiply that up, and it's no great surprise that women tend to have more of a problem with mental health, particularly depression and anxiety post-concussion. And the really worrying one there is suicidality. 2.5 times greater than the background population. And the statistics, huge study, 250,000 individuals in Canada, and 2.5 times more likely for 7 years after a single concussion. And that risk factor is increased equally in both males and females. So we need to be spending more time looking at the longer term support of these individuals. These are the hidden issues that nobody's talking about and nobody's actioning properly. As I say there, persistent concussional symptoms normally will persist for up to 6 months, but there are a small proportion of individuals who actually have ongoing issues indefinitely, particularly those that have sustained a repeated number of concussions over a period of time. I'm not going to bore you with that. I jumped ahead, but there's the figures on it. Roughly 1.5 to 1 to 2.25 to 1 if you look at all the aggregate sports. Amazingly enough, women's basketball has the highest aggregate score. It's supposed to be a non-contact sport. Interestingly, that's falling backward and hitting their head on the basketball court. That is a pretty worrying statistic, I think you would agree. World Rugby says women are less likely than males to get concussion. I disagree. More of that to go. Why do women have more of a problem? Simple answer. If you look around, the ladies have more delicate necks. It stands to reason. We know what a man looks like, we know what a woman looks like, and ladies tend to be of smaller stature with a somewhat narrower neck. The average circumferential difference between females and males is about 20%. But if you look at the muscle bulk within that neck, men have nearly 60% more muscle than women do. And I'm seeing some faces going, wow, that's really interesting. That's the facts of the matter. But the differential between head mass is not really that great. So you then apply 60% differential in neck muscle mass, which is the support and damping in the neck. Apply that to the average mass of the head. Women have a 1-to-3 ratio compared to men to protect your head from abrupt head movement following impacts or following impacts to the rest of the body. Stands to reason that that's not going to be a good thing for your head. Hormones, progesterone. Ladies, those of you who are still of childbearing age will have progesterone and estrogen circling around unless you are on the combined oral contraceptive pill. Progesterone is protective of neurological axons. We use it for major traumatic brain injuries. If someone's got a major brain injury, we actually give them progesterone to help limit the spread of damage that we get. But during your menstrual cycle, towards the end in the late luteal phase, your progesterone level drops very abruptly. It's called the rebound phenomenon. And when you've suddenly and abruptly lost that protective progesterone, if you get a concussional injury within that late luteal phase, you tend to have more persistent symptoms because you haven't got your normal hormonal protection. And that is one of the other reasons. And lastly, as I said, women have got just the same number of brain cells, but they're smaller. Raymond noodle, angel hair noodle, pull on it, which one's going to give way first? The one of smaller diameter because it has less breaking strain, for want of better expression. CTE, kind of my specialist subject with it. First thing, CTE is not concussion. The vast majority of the media make the mistake of rolling CTE in with concussion. The more concussions you have, the more likely you are to have CTE. That may or may not be true, it probably is, but I know Willie Stewart in Glasgow extremely well. I know the boys and girls at the Australian Brain Bank really well, and McKee across at the Boston Brain Bank. They are all unanimous that as far as they're concerned, it is the multiple subconcussive injuries over a period of time that are likely the most imperative reason why aberrant proteins within the brain that form at the bottom of the sulci, you know what a brain looks like a walnut, right down at the bottom of those crevices, that's where tau protein gets laid down. That disrupts normal neurological function, and if it's against the white matter, the corpus callosum, that allows one side of the brain to talk to the other side of the brain, it diminishes that cross-connectivity. Ladies, you are indeed multitaskers. You talk from your right to your left all the time. Us blokes are pretty stupid. We just have one, and we kind of go, okay, I use my right hemisphere because that's okay. But if you have a corpus callosum problem, and remember I was talking about the differential shear stress, where you have that shear stress is normally corpus callosum, women have this issue with cross-connectivity, and they have a problem with craniospatial awareness, a sort of eye-hand-ball type thing, and some elements of higher cognitive function because you've got laid down of an issue. But CTE isn't caused by one concussion. We don't know whether it's numbers of major headline concussion with loss of consciousness, but there are many, many people with CTE out there who've maybe had one proper concussion or maybe two in a total lifetime, but they've had thousands of subconcussive injuries. The inference is that we have to protect the non-headline head injuries to have long-term brain health with it. And there's, I say obviously because it seems obvious to me, why do some people get it and some people don't? There has to be a genetic predisposition somewhere. We don't know exactly which aberration on the chromosome or on your DNA helix causes that. We've got a few likely culprits, but we don't know for sure yet. And by the way, going for an MRI scan doesn't tell you whether you've got CTE or not. You need to have advanced functional MRI scans, brain spectroscopy, and then hopefully we'll see it. The problem is most CTE diagnosis is post-death. We are doing basically brain pathology on it. So I know I've been going at a rate just giving you some hot stuff. There's a lot of problems, but there's a lot of good stuff coming out here. It's more of a hot topic. We're moving forward. There's numerous areas of research, but it's not joined up. Academics are dreadful for talking to other academics. We need to have neurologists talking to neuropsychiatrists, talking to expert brain imagers. We need to talk to people who are looking more medium to long term in neurocognitive and brain rehabilitation. We need to have funding for this. We need to have more of this. We need to educate, and we need to get a societal change where a concussion is no longer yeah, bit of a concussion, it's fine, come on down the pub. It's a brain injury, guys. Take care of it. Don't do anything stupid with it. Law changes have come in. I'm sure you're aware of the changes at the grassroots level. Tackle height has dropped, lower end of sternum. Great. We're not going to get direct head contacts, but we're not going to prevent concussion by doing that. There will still be concussions. There will be massive bodily hits. There will be abrupt head movement. There will be ground contact. But we can mitigate. Multiple incremental improvements are absolutely vital. And I've just run out to my time. I'm not involved with Hedkayse, but I am involved with Tim, giving a bit of advice here, there on the medical stuff. This stuff is really interesting, but I'm going to let him talk to you about it. But what really interests me and why I'm supporting them is, I'm looking at, let's lower the total lifetime debt of subconcussive head injuries and try and minimise those individuals who 2 or 3 decades from now are severely neurologically compromised, impacting their lives, impacting their families' lives, and costing a lot to the NHS. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marshall. That was very interesting. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome onto stage Lewis Carmichael. Lewis, round of applause for Lewis. Lewis is a ex-professional rugby player, played rugby for Edinburgh and was capped for Scotland. So Lewis has kindly agreed to come along and just tell us a little bit about his story and his journey through rugby to the point where he had to retire because of a number of concussions. So Lewis, just tell us a wee bit about yourself. How did you get involved in rugby as a kid? What was your kind of journey through the ranks?
Yeah, so is this mic working?
Is that working?
Yeah. So I started playing rugby when I was 11 years old at North Berwick Minis. Played from there and I went to play at North Berwick High School as well, and that's how I got into it. I did play football originally first, but I wasn't very good at it. Parents were a bit reluctant to me to play rugby because they thought it was dangerous. I was allowed to play when I was 11 years old, so played there. And then I went on to play some representative stuff as well, and played for the under-20s, under-18s, and ended up at Edinburgh as well. So.
Very good. And then, so what age were you then when you signed your first professional contract?
I would have signed my first professional contract at about probably 19, 20 years old. I left school at 18. I played for the Scotland under-18s at the time, and then I went and played 2 years for the Scotland under-20s, went to 2 Junior World Cups, and then I was lucky enough that after the 2 World Cups I got picked up by Edinburgh, and that would have been around about the 2015 World Cup that they kind of brought me in there. So I would be about 20 years old probably. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then you called up for the senior team, is that right?
I did, yeah. I got a call up in 2018 for the senior team. It was really weird how it happened. I was playing with Edinburgh at the time. It was towards the end of the season. Richard Cockerell was my head coach at the time, and he brought me into a room with Grant Gilchrist and Ben Toulis. We were playing Munster that weekend. It was the last game of the season. It was a quarter final, and he just went at the end of it. As it stands, all 3 you're going on the summer tour. I was in like disbelief because I didn't really realise that's how I got told that I was going to go on the summer tour to Canada, USA and Argentina. So played 2 caps that tour, played against Canada off the bench and started against USA as well, so got 2 caps there.
Brilliant. And what position were you again?
I was second row, but I sometimes played 6 flanker as well, so mostly second row I played. Okay,
brilliant. And obviously rugby's a contact sport, we all know that. Did you have any kind of concussions, along the way? Just talk us through how that happened. What happened?
I was aware of concussions. A few of my teammates had concussions and stuff, but I was very lucky that I didn't have any concussions until I was about 20 years old. I had teammates that really suffered badly with it and retired at kind of 19, 20 years old, but it's kind of one of those things you never think it's going to happen to you until it actually happens. My first concussion was when I was out in Australia. I was lucky enough to play a season of Super Rugby, and when I first went over there was no game, so I asked the coach to go and play some local rugby. 10 minutes into it, flew at the line, got my head caught on the wrong side, and I wasn't knocked out, but it was the first time I had a real significant blow at the head. I just remember this massive buzzing in my brain, taking off straight away. And it just took me, to be fair, it took me a couple of days for that to kind of calm down, but I would have been about 20 years old there, and that was the kind of first kind of exposure to getting a concussion as such. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, you said it took you a couple of days to calm down. How did you feel in those couple of days?
It was very strange, until you've experienced it yourself, it's really hard to kind of, because everyone's different in how they experience with concussion, but I just didn't really feel right. Initially after the contact, I felt awful. I felt really bad, really dazed. I had to ask what kind of happened just there. And they're like, oh, you got your head caught on the wrong side. And it took me a little bit of time to kind of come around and understand what kind of had happened. But a couple of days afterwards, I just didn't feel right. The doctor at the time just told me just to don't come out of training, just take a few few days off. And then when I did start going back to training and I was running around, it just felt like there was a cloud hanging over me. It wasn't so much like really bad heads or anything like that, but I just knew in myself that I wasn't 100% right. But luckily, maybe after a sort of week, it calmed down and I was back training and playing again after that.
Okay, and were you aware of any guidelines at that time around return to play, or?
No, it was very, very different. Like obviously I was in Australia, I was working with a doctor that I didn't really know, but it was mostly just a conversation. How are you feeling? Are you feeling okay? And it was kind of like trial and error. I'd go out and run a bit, and then I've done a training session on the Tuesday, we had the Wednesday off, and I woke up on the Wednesday and I was like, I'm just not quite feeling right, eh? So I phoned up the doc and he was like, all right, okay, we'll have a wee chat and stuff like that. Done the kind of SCAT test, what it was like a bit of paper, double-sided with a number of questions on it. It would be stuff like name the months of the year in reverse. I'll give you 5 words, remember them, and I'll ask you for them at the end of the session. Numbers in reverse, standing on one leg with your eyes shut, kind of thing. Basic kind of things, but it was mostly just a kind of conversation, just to see how you are. Then when I did feel fine, I was like, I'm good to go. I kind of had to prove it by hitting a couple of bags, and then that was me off.
Okay.
Done.
So you made that decision for you made that decision.
I pretty much made the decision for myself, yeah, because it was a conversation. If I said that I was fine, he wasn't going to stop me. He wasn't going to stop me in returning to play.
Okay. And were you aware, and there's a lot of research now about the sort of cumulative effects Marshall was talking to there, were you aware about, at any time during your professional career about how an accumulation of concussions could have an impact?
I was definitely more aware of it towards the end of my career, but at the start, like before I even had one, I didn't even think about concussion. Like I said, it's one of these things that you don't think about is going to happen until it actually happens to yourself, but I wasn't really aware of what the cumulative effect of hitting my head over and over again would be. Like, I probably had about 5 concussions in my whole playing career, but just unfortunately they're reasonably significant and had lasting effects with them. But yeah, I guess it's the other, like I've obviously in the position that I played is quite a physical position, so I've been smashed a lot of times, and I'd like to think I've smashed a couple of people as well. So it's those kind of contacts that you bounce back up afterwards and you play on that I really don't know what effect it's having on my brain, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
And did you ever feel a pressure to return playing versus I suppose a concern for your health? Yeah,
like so I had a concussion when I just came back playing for Scotland. It was pre-season, and this was a time in my career where I felt like I was probably at my peak, and I felt like I was really, really good. I just came back from a summer tour and I wanted to have a really good season in Edinburgh. And we're playing a pre-season, or of going to be playing in a pre-season game, and I got a knock in training, and I think I should have been stepped away from rugby for a couple of weeks, but I wasn't, and I was too keen to get back because I didn't want to lose my place, because it's professional sport, it was my job at the time, like you're always worried about contracts and stuff, so there was a lot of pressure on myself to play, so I probably wasn't being, I wish that decision was taken out of my hands, because and professional rugby players or professional athletes are always going to want to put their hand up, and I probably, if I had an honest conversation with myself, I probably wasn't right, but I wanted to play, and so I just kind of said, yeah, I'm good to go, but it was probably a terrible idea, you know what I mean? So I wish that decision was taken out of my hands, basically.
Yeah, and do you feel, obviously professional sport, to talk about the locker room, to talk about the macho culture, do you think there's a sort of pressure, not just from, we should talk about contracts, but just about from your peers to get back playing? Yeah, like it's different because like everyone deals with concussions differently. Like some people get knocked, they get really bad heads for a couple of days, and then they're fine. I wasn't like that. I was a little bit, my symptoms weren't as severe, but I was always out for a longer period of time. So if me and you were both to get a bang on the weekend, and you had really sore heads for a couple of days, but then you were back the following week, and I wasn't, I'd be like, oh, why is he getting to go? Why can he return? Like, why am I different, kind of thing? So it wasn't as such that you'd be putting the pressure on me. It was almost like the pressure on myself that other people are returning quicker than me, and it's just the questions like, why is my brain different, kind of thing. Okay. Yeah. And so obviously you're a professional rugby player. You've got a medical team around you at Edinburgh. When you're with Scotland, you've got a medical team. But just talk us through, thinking back to grassroots and kids coming through. Marshall has mentioned, it's probably not even a physio, never mind a doctor.
Yeah.
For some people playing not just rugby but football, whatever sport it is.
Yeah.
Do you think there's enough awareness at grassroots level across sport about how serious concussion can be?
No, I don't think so. Like, because I was 20 and you were aware of it, but not that aware, to be honest. I think there needs to be a lot more like education in what can happen if you're not looking at the signs. Like, if you get a knock and you think you're okay and you get another knock, and you can be a lot of bother. So there just needs to be a lot of education in concussions at the earliest possible stage, the telltale signs to look out for, and even stuff like that, coaching wise, even how to tackle properly and stuff like that, because the amount of times that my first concussion, I got my head caught on the wrong side, and that's what all kicked it off for me. So it's understanding, you know, you want to tackle your shoulder, you don't want to tackle with your head. Some people just fly in recklessly and are lucky that they get away with it, but how long will they get away with it for, kind of thing. So there can definitely be more educational stuff on head knocks and concussion.
Brilliant. And so you made the decision to retire in 2021.
Yeah.
Just tell us what prompted that.
So I had probably 3 concussions at this point. It was August of 2020. I had a slight knock, well, a reasonably slight knock. It was actually a massive 6'6" Fijian with a bag. So although it was a soft contact, they can produce quite a lot of force, these guys. And it was that kind of like whiplashy movement. So it took me a couple of weeks to kind of settle with that, my eyes, and I just couldn't really focus on anything. So it really took me a couple, weeks to settle from that one. I'd just recently come back from an ACL reconstruction. 2 weeks before my last game, I had to get a epidural in my back to play the following week because my back was knackered. And then at training in November of 2020, just at training in the back pitch of the Murrayfield, one of my teammates, completely accident, just flew in and caught me at the side of the head. It was quite a nasty blow. I wasn't knocked out, I've never been knocked out, but it was quite a nasty blow. Physio came over to me straight away and was like, "Are you okay? I seen that." And I was like, again, "Yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay." And then we moved on to do some line-out drills, and then I was just like, I'm not okay. Like, I just cannot concentrate, my head's an absolute mess. I spoke to the physio and I was like, I'm not okay. And he was like, just get yourself back inside. So I walked into the changing room, and I had a massive rush of like emotion, and I just started like burst out crying and like properly sobbing. It was quite uncharacteristic from me. And then I went in and I went away. The doctors and that just said, "I'll just get away for a bit." So I went away for a couple of days, and then one of the doctors, the Scottish doctors, phoned me up, and he was just like, "You need to stop banging your head like this. We need to find you another career." And he is a very well respected doctor, and he told me that I wasn't going to question it. So when he said that, we need to find you a new career, that's you done, I just kind of took that as, okay, that's me kind of done, So
how did that feel?
I kind of, when I took the hit, I kind of knew. I think that's why the kind of rush of emotion kind of happened, because I kind of think my body knew that I can't keep hitting my head. But I was gutted. But the symptoms of concussions can be like the depression that comes with it, like the not feeling right, and it lingers for so long that there's a little bit of me that was actually relieved that I wasn't going to put my head in these dark places anymore. But I was gutted. Like I don't miss playing rugby, funnily enough, but I do miss like being around the like 30 of my mates on a daily basis. But I don't actually miss getting my head knocked on a daily basis either. So.
Okay. And so you've started a new job.
Yeah.
How are you now, functional wise, cognitive?
Cognitive wise, yeah, I still live with like concussive like symptoms. I am much better from that day that I did retire, but there is some things that I still can't do. It's very much with me now. It's like a blood pressure kind of symptom. So like if I was to go in the gym and chuck a load of weights on and start squatting, those last kind of like 2 reps where you're really having to push to get the weight up. After that, I'd really struggle. I'd feel really groggy, that kind of brain fog. I do a bit of coaching now as well. I'm forwards coach down at the Southern Knights. And even a couple of weeks ago, I just had a tackle shield and I was just doing a few drills and that, and I was not getting stuck in, but just giving them a little bit of resistance. And I'm driving home and my head was like pounding. I was just like, it's not ideal. But it's nearly been kind of 2 years since I've retired. and I'm much better of identifying what symptoms trigger me feeling worse, so I can kind of manage it to an extent. But yeah, I work with Openreach as an engineer now. I absolutely love it. I absolutely genuinely love my job. And yeah, I'm in a pretty good place. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm sure that's not been an easy story to tell for Lewis, you know, giving up a professional career in rugby, but we're grateful for you today, giving your time up to come and speak to us. Can we please have a big round of applause for Lewis Carmichael?
Cheers.
So, I know our time's against us, but I think it's important that we hear from our next speaker, because Tim is also a very seasoned, experienced rugby player, played for England, Leicester, and the British and Irish Lions, a proper rugby superstar, if you know your rugby. And Tim's now really committed and passionate about safety in rugby, and he's going to talk about just how science, we've all, over the pandemic, science has rescued us and got us out of it. So Tim's going to come and speak to us now on how science is going to impact and hopefully lessen, it's not a magic bullet, but make rugby just that little bit safer. So if we hand over to Tim.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone. Just want to reiterate, Lewis, that's great. Great for you to speak to everybody today. I think we all empathise a little bit with how it must feel. I saw you giving a big when you sat down. I suppose my background, yeah, I played rugby, and I'm fortunate not to be suffering the long-term problems that Lewis is obviously dealing with. But I'm acutely aware that I've got mates that aren't here anymore. Literally not here. They've died. Some of them have committed suicide. Other ones are suffering totally life-changing impact from a sport we love. So yeah, I'm interested because I'm privileged to be here. Rugby's given me the confidence to have an amazing life, but not everybody's been that lucky. So I think it's our moral obligation when we start to see the patterns to do what we can, when we can. And so really, we're talking a little bit about science and technology as part of a solution, but today it's about collaboration, it's about education, it's about sharing stories and being motivated to work together to help other people. So my mission really today is to stop more people having to pay the price long term for a sport they love. And I thank and applaud you all for what you're doing as I walk around the exhibition, that's different. For what we're trying to do to help people when we can, and by working together we can achieve a lot. So first of all, I was interested because I realised that some of my mates were struggling, and I was always the union rep, I was always the guy, but we didn't know any better. I've played on without vision, I've played on without memory, I've had a facial reconstruction, I've woken up inside, but for some reason I'm still here. My wife might just say I've always been forgetful. But really I'm a bit scared. I'm a bit scared whether there's something deep down in the back of my brain that hasn't been diagnosed yet. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to stay healthy, and I'll work with people like Lewis to make sure everything I've found out can be shared. But the best thing to do regarding mild traumatic brain injury is to try to prevent it. So this is the passion. I basically found this business called Hedkayse. It's a business, and they make these clever cycling helmets. And all simply I said, look guys, you do this, the world's safest cycling helmet, is there any way that you could start making some kit for rugby? And they say, yeah, we don't see why not. So the beautiful thing is that for those of you that cycle, you know, we should all be wearing a protective helmet. Hands up if you cycle. Hands up again if you cycle without a helmet on. Brilliant. Or you let your kids do it, go on a skateboard, go and do something dangerous. Please be careful. These are basically made out of polystyrene, so they work once, they're sacrificial. But did you know that if I drop it on the floor, it's probably lost some of its protective quality? So if you know, in the small print, if you've had a collision with one of these, you should get a new one. The good thing about Hedkayse, which is this cycle business, is it recovers. So it's tested. You know, you can do stuff like that, and it's totally fine and sellable and wearable. It isn't damaged. Sorry about the wall. Yeah, it must be thinner up here, right? So, if I click this, what happens? I'm just going to jump through the evolution, if you like, of a business. It's not that important. It just says that in 2013, the guy that created that cycle helmet was motivated to do it because his mate died from a cycling accident. And as a molecular scientist, a material specialist, he thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to find a material that recovers so that if this happens to somebody else, hopefully they'll be alive. So that's back in 2013. Fast forward to November last year was when I met these guys in Market Harborough. And we're about to launch, hopefully, the world's safest rugby headguard based on the same technology. We don't have a lot of time here, so I'm just going to skip it. But basically, we're looking to do cycle helmets, which we do, but also start creating lots of protective headguards for different sports. So if you go skiing, if you go mountaineering, there's basically going to be a whole range of products out there with this really cool material on the inside, which slows and spreads the load so it doesn't go through to your brain. We've done it based on science and medicine and research. So we work with people like Dr. Marshall Garrett, like the preeminent dude when it comes to knowing what happens to the brain. We've worked with the leading doctors who go and provide medicine and support to schools. We've done it with science and done some real questionnaires about how do people really feel. And now we're about to launch a product which will look a bit like this. Again, it's based on science, so it's not about showing off and selling because there's a problem. It's not a fear sell. It's a genuine way we can solve a problem. You can't see this stat, but just for basic knowledge, if you get a knock on the head, which is less than 80 Gs, it probably means that you're not going to have any long-term damage. It's not going to lead to a build-up of tau or a build-up of like subconcussive problems, and it's not going to give you a massive headache or cause a problem. So if we can make every impact that reaches your brain directly actually only register less than 80 G, then we're dealing with a lot of the problem. And that's what the rugby headguard does at body temperature when it's needed. So it will take a 550 G, which would basically crush your brain, and make it less than 80 G. And that's what the science at Imperial says. So it's pretty cool, but it's not the whole answer, because you're still going to get whiplash. You're still going to get punched in the face if I'm English up here in Scotland. Global domination, it's not about rugby really. It's not just about the UK. For me, it's about South Africa and Zimbabwe and France, where we've all lost people. We're all in the same boat. We're all humans regarding whether we're professional or amateur. And wouldn't it be cool? So my kids play. They're 13 and 14. I tend to watch rugby more than cricket because I'm more scared in case one of my boys gets banjoed on the head and maybe the coaches aren't quite up to knowing to get him off. So I now spend my time educating at grassroots level, and I'll be travelling around the country talking to all those teachers and parents, working with people like Marshall Garrett who can provide that education and communicate it in a way that resonates. And so we know if in doubt, we sit them out. I love rugby because it gives me the confidence to travel the world and change the world, hopefully. But it's still scary, isn't it? Any parents in here with kids that play? Any parents in here that have taken their kids away from rugby because of the dangers? And I'm not going to criticise you for that, because an unprotected skull in a child is a vulnerable skull. So we really need to reduce the risk. But I think on balance, especially when we start wearing headguards and protection, the benefit of playing rugby far outweighs the risk. But let's get the evidence and the proof to do that. A lot of details. I'm happy to share this. If you see me on a stand outside, you'll see that we've got a little stand and we've got some little brochures that you can take away, which is basically just the science of where we are now. And then my mission coming to Scotland, as I've already done, is chat to a few people who've got contacts in the schools and in the clubs, and we can go and just do this educational program to empower the teachers, to change the little rugby players like me. So when I played on for England with no memory, I did it because I wanted to be part of the team. And you have these code of ethics where you say, pain's temporary, glory is eternal. And if you can play, you will play on. It wasn't, like Lewis was saying, it wasn't really about being selected. It was more about, I don't want to let my mates down. And my body is a sacrificial carcass. And that's wrong, isn't it? Because you retire at, if you're lucky, not at 19 or 20 odd, or you get through to 30 odd, but then you've still got another 60, 70 years of life to have, where we've got to be able to be well enough to pass on and nurture our own kids. So it's really important what we're doing. I applaud everybody in here for your work, helping people to prevent them suffering, and then giving them a better quality of life once we've suffered. The good news is there's lots of stuff going on which is repairing the brain. I use stuff like adaptive hypoxia or altitude training to help reduce my oxidative stress and reduces my brain fog. And these are things I'm lucky and privileged to have been able to get access to. But if you like, it's a life ambition to prevent people being hurt. Education on how to tackle, how to enforce the protocols. So I want to see players, as soon as they take a ding, put their hand up and walk off the pitch. Whereas in my generation, I took a ding, I didn't dare tell anybody. And I'd play on without any vision or without any memory of who I was, and that's wrong. We've got to change that culture through education, but also make it safer by having fantastic technology which will mitigate, 60, 70% of the potential risk. Maybe there's another 20 to go through education and awareness and protocols. You'll never make it 100% safe, but the joy and the empowerment and the sense of worth you get through professional team sport, especially contact sport, if you've never experienced it, it's euphoric and life-changing, and gives me the chance to hopefully go and inspire my own kids and their mates and the next generation. So it's worth it. Yeah, so this is just another slide. It's if you're not into rugby and I'm boring you, but you might be a crazy skier. Or you might like to play cricket, or you might be into horses. All these things that are dangerous can be impacted and made a lot safer through education and technology. But please, if you take anything away from here, it's not called concussion anymore. It's called a mild traumatic brain injury. It's not something to be ignored. It's to be something that's to be educated. And it's to be brave and to be strong is to put your hand up and walk off the field. And if you see your mate's got a bang on the head, you tell him to go. Thanks very much.
Folks, our time is gone, but just while we've got these guys here, does anyone have any questions they would like to put to them? I have to say I'd be a brave man that would punch him in the face. So there's a question over there.
We come up and answer?
Yeah, just come up.
I'll be for Marshall.
I've never talked at one of these things before. Do you think it should be made to be a legal requirement with rugby and football and cycling for a helmet to be worn? Doesn't it have to be as big as an American football one? But do you think it should be a legal requirement for those sports and children?
Who's your question to? Which one of our? Any of them?
Well, all three. all three can answer.
Exactly. I'm going to pass this back over. Is this over?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It is. Okay, sorry about that. Personal viewpoint, yes. And the reason for that's fairly straightforward. Lewis was talking about, I wish that decision had been taken out of my hands. In Tim's case, he's told us what it's like to play at the absolute ultimate elite level. And from my point of view, I've lived and breathed head injuries and the consequences of those. if I could give you a short answer, summer of '86, doing my junior training in trauma, Glasgow Royal Infirmary, 12 children in that summer, none with cycle helmets, all hitting their heads off curbstones. 4 died, 4 had major traumatic brain injuries and survived, and the others had concussions and ultimately got better. My boss at the time felt that all of those injuries could have been prevented by wearing a cycle helmet, and it staggers me at the moment that it's not a mandatory requirement. You know, it's a cost to the NHS, which is struggling. So why should people's stupidity cost all of us all that money? I think it's, yes, you can say it's Big Brother, but we're actually looking at the greatest good for all. We're actually looking after an individual's health. Moving to the kids, if I could say, they are not at the age of majority until they're 16. We can't expect children and even teenagers to truly understand the implications of concussion and the long-term issues. If you were a parent and somebody gets a concussional injury when they're sitting there hires, forgive me, I know there are national 7s or something now, but I'm that generation. Look at the impact on the individual's potential life by not getting the higher results they wanted because their cognitive function was down through a head injury. And that's really the answer as far as I'm concerned. And it all comes back to education. It's because society doesn't truly understand what the long-term implications of this are. The people here in this audience are much more in tune with it. So my answer is yes, and Tim and I are actually going down to the House of Lords next month, where we're getting the opportunity to talk to some of the Lords about lawmaking, and let's start talking about whether we make participation and certainly head protection in sub-18-year-olds mandatory, and then let's make that step, then let's take it forward. Let's not try and do it all at one time, but let's take a step, a further step, a further step in an evolutionary manner.
Oh, nice. Well, I was just going to say that I wore scrum cap when I played. I always wore a scrum cap when I played, so I liked it. I felt like I couldn't play without it. It was just a thing for me. But it's not going to stop concussions. But I did like it. There was one concussion that I did get at training, which I didn't wear my scrum cap, and I always ask myself, would it have been as bad, or would I still have got those symptoms if I had that protection? I honestly don't know. But yeah, I always wore a scrum cap when I played it.
Yeah, so the difference is this scrum cap that we've created actually does prevent the force reaching the brain. We're having to get a law change in rugby to make it legal. So bizarrely in rugby at the moment, you cannot wear a head guard that reduces the force from 530G down to below that 250G. They didn't want to weaponize the head. They didn't want people turning up wearing American football helmets to play rugby. But it's not working, is it? So what we're working on at the moment, part of that curry last night was with the representatives from Scottish Rugby Football Union. I've already applied and working with World Rugby to get a trial. So as soon as we've made this rugby head guard, which will be in a couple of weeks, it'll be tested again with Imperial, and again it'll be given a world trial legitimacy so that players can use it in matches. So I think it should be made mandatory based on science. But I also think, you know, kids look at the telly. We're inspired correctly or incorrectly by our heroes. And I want to see professional role models on the TV. And that's the management of the game as much as the players themselves. I'd like the responsibility taken away from players, because I would have played on as well. And it should be that we're all wearing head guards that will save and reduce the amount of concussion and subconcussion and the build-up of tau, which leads to this long-term problem. So yeah, but we've got to prove that. So we'll carry on testing, carry on working with universities, and we'll carry on cornering the lawmakers until they've got nowhere left to go. And hopefully within the next couple of seasons, we'll see all the kids not building up this debt of injury in their brains through sport. And hopefully we'll in the future, we'll have an even healthier relationship with contact sport.
Folks, thank you very much. Our time is gone. Well, of course, yeah, quickly.
Yes, thanks.
This is going to cost you all your lunch, but carry on.
No, it's
Just
not.
make it brief as possible. I've never talked at one of these things before, never been to them. But just the question is to us all, but I find that this day and age it has changed compared to well, it was 35 years ago when I was a youngster, playing all these sports, doing cycling, playing rugby, but I preferred football. And I took several knocks over the years, to my brain, to my head. So it's only now that it's getting recognised, actually, because there are a lot of changes. As like if there's a sport injury now, especially in football and that, the players get taken off when they get a head injury and that, but it never used to happen years ago. So what he's are doing is quite right, it has been recognised.
I think I just say that we didn't know necessarily, but when I was playing back in the 80s, what we know now. So the can's been kicked for too long. We know from American football, from what's happened over there, that there is a definite link between banging your head for 10, 15 years and then suffering for it. So for me, it's moral, but also, I'd say, legal, that decisions are made to make the sport safer for everyone to play.
Absolutely. And on that note, can I just ask you to put your hands together, please, for our panel? They've been first class. And